It's great. So we're going to start tonight, opening up the first topic, talking about results of the story. Just kind of a recap last night. We talked about that each of us has a story. Each of us is on a journey. Each of us is going through a season in our lives. And it's a different spot where all of us are at. The question is, are we honest with ourselves? Are we willing to go there? Are we willing to share our story with someone and allow somebody to walk with us to experience healing and restoration in that area? Or do we take our stories and just stuff them down inside, like I did for the first 32 years of my life? Many times that's what we do. And we talked the second topic last night about why we do that, because many times there's not a space created or a space provided that we can trust and feel safe enough to go there. One thing that I thought about later that I didn't share last night that creates an unsafe environment, and this is for all of us. There's not one of us in here that is not guilty of some of this. And one reason that there's often unsafe spaces is because of gossip. We have a very well-oiled machine that works so well called gossip. And we just talk about others and others' for failures and others' weaknesses and others' mistakes. And sometimes because we know everybody, it's hard to keep things confidential because they make good stories. And we draw attention to ourselves by what we share with other people. And it's really hard for us to stay and keep things confidential. So I want to challenge us all with that, including myself. When I hear somebody's stories, when I hear somebody's treasures, things that they've been holding and stuffing inside, what makes me want to go share that with somebody else? Is that about me? What's that about? Why do I do that? Often creates a very unsafe space where people don't trust me anymore, and they won't share their story with me. And oftentimes the result of that is a lack of freedom. Results of sharing our story many times will develop a beautiful relationship in a marriage. And I'm going to talk to married couples here just for a little bit. Guys, when you married your spouse, when you married your wife, you had a deep desire to win and have in your hands her whole heart. You didn't just want half of it. You didn't want a quarter of it. You didn't want a third of it or three-quarter of it. You wanted her whole heart. Same with you ladies. When you made the commitment to give your life in marriage to your spouse, to your husband, you had the desire to claim his whole heart. And for those of you that are young and would like to get married, planning to get married, thinking about marriage, you can relate to that. Maybe some of you in a courtship right now. And as you pursue that relationship, as you pursue God's will in that, your desire is to have the whole heart of your future spouse. Let me share something with you. If those wounds and the hurts and the past and that dirt in life is stuffed down inside, you cannot give your whole heart to your spouse. You're only giving your spouse part of your heart, and that doesn't work. Remember, I shared something with the psychiatrist 10 years into our marriage that my wife didn't know. See, she didn't have that part of me. There was something that I was keeping from her that she didn't know. And that developed an unhealthy connection. We were not fulfilled in connection emotionally and spiritually like God intended because there's things I was keeping from her. There's no possible way that you can experience marriage in the way God intended it to be if you're keeping things from each other, if you don't know who that other person is. There's no other relationship on earth that we know of that two people can become one other than a husband and a wife in a marriage. How does that happen? How does that, we can't describe that. That's the mystery of God as two people become one flesh. And it's not to be put asunder what God has joined together. Do you think for 1 minute that God intended that we don't give our whole hearts to our spouse? If the whole heart is given to each other, if we sacrifice, if we connect, if we yield our whole hearts to one another, there's a beautiful thing that happens in marriage, and marriages begin to bloom. And those marriages affect lives around those marriages because of what's coming out of that marriage. Anabaptist people, as a whole, understand that divorce is wrong, and they don't take part of divorce physically. There's many, many, many of us in our culture today that are divorced emotionally. We're living together because it's the right thing to do, but we're not emotionally connected. And friends, when we're not connected that way, we are divorced. We still have two bodies living in the same home, but we're not blooming. There's not this radiant love of Jesus shining out from our marriages to other people. And God uses marriages so many times to reveal himself to the world. It's a relationship like no other. It's a relationship that you can't back out of. You're stuck in a good way. I am so thankful today that I'm stuck to my wife, and she's stuck to me. She can't leave me. She can't. Looking at it through spiritual eyes, through spiritual lenses, she can't do it. If I'm looking at that through this correct spiritual lenses, I can't. There's no option for me to walk away from my wife. Can't do it. That's a relationship I can't get out of. When I understand that and I'm committed to that, and she has my whole heart and she knows everything about me, and we're walking this journey together, beautiful things happen. But this is kind of what our marriage looked like after 10 years. It was supposed to be blooming, it was supposed to be brilliant, it was supposed to be shining, but it wasn't. Because there's things about each other that we didn't know. I shared a little bit last night, and I'll just clarify some things. I was very rejected. Remember the abuse that I experienced. Couldn't talk to my father. I pulled away, became guilty and angry and frustrated. My dad pulled away. He was angry to begin with. So our relationship went like that. So never did I spend time with or really experience a father like I should have as a young child. Created a huge void in my heart. So I married my wife, a very desperate young man, to have all these needs fulfilled. My wife grew up in a home, a very good home. She was never abused in any way by her father, didn't have a harsh parenting experience in any way. But her parents didn't know how to affirm, appreciate, or give value to. My wife is a natural go-getter. Linda, did you experience that tonight? She wanted to wash her dishes, didn't she? When we're somewhere, we were over there for supper tonight, and my belt's too tight because of that. Yes, it is your fault. The food was too good. Oh yeah, Anita made the meal, but you made the cheesecake. So you have to take some of the blame. But anyhow, my wife is such a natural workaholic that if you invite us to supper, she would be the first one to say we need to do the dishes. She would do the dishes long before the host even thinks about doing the dishes. She's always working. When we got married, at the bridal table, I was there most of the afternoon alone because she was doing dishes and telling people what they should do and helping get the cake ready and preparing the meal for the evening and helping these people do this and making the decisions over there. We started on the wrong foot. Literally, I was at the bridal table alone most of the time because she is the greatest servant that I've ever met on the planet. There's nobody that serves more. But it turned into the negative. It kind of went into the ditch for her in her life, and she became a workaholic because work became more important to her than anything else in life. That became my pain. We became pregnant in the first 2 months of our marriage, and she was working a full-time job as a pregnant mom up until, I think it was 2 weeks before the baby was born. She doesn't believe me. I think it was. Worked 5 days a week. And was mom at home and a wife to me. That created a huge lack of time spent with one another. We hardly ever had time the first 2-3 years of our marriage to spend time with one another. Remember the desperation that I had? I didn't understand her, she didn't understand me. She never got appreciated for anything that she did at home. She was a workaholic, she was a servant, she was a giver, she did everything for everybody. She was the first one to volunteer, grew up on a farm. Her sister or her brother and his wife lived in the house next door, had twins that were both colicky. She spent hours and hours and hours taking care of those babies. It's just her. It's her nature. She does that. Well, it became something that she was doing to achieve appreciation, because the only way that she could believe that she did a good job is if everything was accomplished that day that she had planned to accomplish, and she could lay in bed at night and say, I got it all done. Because if something went wrong at 9 o'clock in the morning and she didn't get everything done, everybody was miserable. And if she overslept, the whole world knew it. Because she was one that was just a doer. And well, that, again, never had time for me. So I did what? I became angry. I didn't understand the lack of appreciation. I didn't understand the reason she was a workaholic. And so I fed the wound by criticizing her, by getting angry and condemning her. I used to sit on the couch and say, you don't even have time for me. We're just newly married. We can't even sit on the couch and process life together and talk about life. I can't believe you're doing this. Don't you understand that we're married now? You're supposed to do this for me? Can you imagine how brutal that was? What did that feel like to her? That was horrific. I was just smashing her heart. I had no idea why she was working that way. And then she said, well, if you don't do the dishes, somebody will. I'll get to you once the kids are grown. The work around here is not getting done with you sitting on the couch. I will whenever I get time, but that time never came around. Can you imagine how that made me feel? So that's the spiral that we started going down. And in 10 years after that, that's what our marriage looked like. I was suicidal. I was angry. I was critical. She was shut down, pulled away, and working 100 miles an hour. Believe me, everybody in our neighborhood loved her. My dad just loved her because he loves workaholics. That's how he accepts people, is by how they work. And he just fell in love with her. But that's where our marriage was at. It wasn't shining because we didn't understand each other. And I'll never forget, as we processed that week together, as we unloaded each other's stories, and the counselor helped us understand who we are. And for the first time, I saw that I was the one that was causing her to work. Because of my anger and my criticism, drove her to achieve something that I couldn't give her, that nobody in life had actually offered her except for herself. And she was feeding the void in my heart. The more she pulled away, the angrier I became. We didn't know. We just acted out of the flesh, acted out of her pain. We hadn't given our hearts to each other. And we shared those things with each other and shared our life and shared our past and our sensitivities and our needs and our wants and our wounds and our hurts. And I'll never forget how life began to change when we began to understand that. And our whole hearts connected. And I began to show her appreciation and give her value and give her purpose and notice all the little things she did and tell her about it. All of a sudden, she came to the couch. And she sat down and she said, what's life like? For the first 15 years of our marriage, I begged her every year to go on a little getaway as just a married couple to spend time with each other. We never had time. 5 years ago, we went on our first little trip, planned by her. Things can change when we understand hearts. Just 2 months ago, we took a little trip in the middle of our extremely busy schedule, developing a ministry, forming a business, raising a family, and in the middle of being extremely busy, it was our anniversary, we decided to get away for 3 days. The second day we were there, she said, thank you for tearing me away from my busy schedule and all my responsibilities so that I could just spend time with you. You remember that same woman that said, I'll get to you when the work's done? But see, something changed here because we gave each other our whole hearts. And we were able to listen, care, and understand and create a space that we could share. And then we were able to sacrifice and come together and make that marriage beautiful. Friends, if you want a marriage as God intended, you have to go there. You have to share your story. And friends, You got to do it together. You have to do it together. If you ever come to my office, I will never work with you alone if you're married. I won't do it. There's no value in that. Because I'm not the one that needs to get to know you. Your spouse does. Well, Jeremy, I've got some very hurtful things that happened to me that my spouse doesn't know. They don't need to know that. I just want to walk through the healing process so that I don't hurt them. No. That's not what this is about. You're not one flesh with me. You're one flesh with your spouse. That's the person that you need to walk with. I'll be there as a coach. I'll be there to walk with you. But you need somebody to connect to, and I'm not that person. You connect with the person beside you. And that's why I only work with couples when they're married. If I would work with a person by themselves that's married, the biggest issue I would have is the empty chair. Because you can't get anywhere with an empty chair. So I would encourage you, if you're looking at life and if you have your story that you need to share, or if you're a caregiver and you provide space for someone to share. Maybe John comes over, like we said last night, he knocks on your screen door and he wants to sit down at your kitchen table and share his story. That's okay. But you're a caregiver, you point it back to the right direction. Thanks, John, for coming tonight. Appreciate you so much. The vulnerability, the honesty that you had in sharing life with us. I think we ought to take the next step. Sometime if you have another evening that you want to share, why don't we call me? Next Thursday night would be good for us. But tell you what, did you bring your wife? Oh, I can't do that. I think it'll be all right, John. I don't want to force you to do anything you don't want to do, but I think it'd be a great idea. I'll help you process this with her. Well, I just don't think she's prepared to hear that. I understand that. That makes sense to me. You're probably right. She's probably not ready. But could you just give it one chance? Let's see where it goes. If it doesn't work, you don't have to go on. But you have to do everything you can to bring that together. Because there's a lot of things missing, and it'll never come together if you don't do it together. Remember, you're one. There's nothing that should be able to separate you. The second reason that we want to share our story is because of our families. And when I say families, I'm talking about children, friends. When you've got wounds and hurts in your life, and you've stuffed it all down inside, the ones that are going to reap from that the most is the next generation, is your children. There's nothing that creates more stability in a child's life than the security that comes from a parent's relationship with each other and God. A child feels something that's unspoken when a mom and a dad are connected in Christ and each other. It creates an environment that a child thrives in because their needs are fulfilled. When a mom and dad are not connected and hearts are not united in one, and when we're keeping things from each other, it creates a very insecure environment for a child. Little children, unborn children, know that. An unborn child at 23 weeks of age has every emotion developed inside. And don't tell me they can't hear through a mother's skin. If you and I can hear through that wall if somebody's hammering on the outside, they can hear. And when a mom and dad are arguing or fighting with angry voices, that unborn child can hear that. You think that child wants to be born? I've heard many, many stories in my office from babies that refused to be born, that had to be forced to be born because they were coming into a very dysfunctional setting in their homes, and they wanted to stay inside where everything was safe. We've got to consider that when we look at our own lives and our own hearts for the sake of our children. Children don't like when mom and dad don't get along. Children don't like it when mom and dad are just silent. We don't have to be a mom and dad that are fighting and arguing. A mom and dad that are sitting at the table listening to each other eat. It's not a secure environment for a child. That child has no idea what's going on in life because there's no connection. I remember our children were in the, if I remember right, it was the fifth, the fourth, and the second grade, our three oldest children. If it wasn't those grades, it was very close to that. We're going to a public school in our area when my wife and I went through the Caring for the Heart program at Freedom Hills. 6 months later, I wasn't able to attend that night for some reason. I don't remember what it was. It was parent-teacher conferences, and my wife met with all the teachers that were teaching our children at the time. It was 3 different teachers. And my wife came home from those parent-teacher conferences and said, Jeremy, she said, you won't believe what the teachers asked me. All 3 teachers asked me, what happened in your home in the last 6 months? And my wife said, I have no idea. What are you talking about? And all 3 teachers said that your children have completely changed who they are in the last 6 months. And my wife said, what do you mean? And they said they have become the kindest, sacrificial, easy to teach, great personality children that we've had. She said the other day, your son allowed somebody to butt in front of him at the drinking line to the water fountain. It was totally fine. And when another student drops a pencil, your children are the first one to pick them up. So what did you do? And it's something profound because we've noticed a drastic change. That's not how your children were 6 months ago. My wife said, what do you think happened? I said, I have no idea. I said, we didn't do anything. I remember laying in bed that night, and all of a sudden it hit me, and I told my wife, I said, oh, I do know. You remember 6 months ago? You and I sat in a little office across the desk, shared our stories, experienced healing and freedom, and connected. And she looked at me and she said, you're exactly right. 3 teachers in the same time frame, in different classrooms, said something dramatically has happened to your children. The environment at home changed. And it changed the whole demeanor of our children. And friends, the only way that I can explain that is security. They felt a secure environment from 2 people that weren't hurting anymore. 2 people that weren't hurting each other anymore. 2 people that fell in love. 2 people that had the marriage that God intended them to have. And don't hear me paint a perfect picture, by the way. We're not perfect. We still make a lot of mistakes. We still work through those mistakes. And the interesting thing today is, especially our youngest children, when my wife and I do have a little disagreement, and I remember one night we were joking, we were having fun in a conversation, disagreeing with each other, and I raised my voice just slightly, and our kids, the youngest ones, were over in the sitting room playing with toys on the floor, and the instant I raised my voice, both of them raised their heads, quit playing, and stared at Mom and Dad. And I looked at my wife and I said, look at that. We were totally in fun, but my voice raised, and instantly they stopped playing. Because in their mind, they heard that tone of voice, and instantly something was wrong in the environment. It was such a rare thing for the 2 youngest at that moment that it stopped them dead in their tracks. Children are very sensitive, friends. Extremely sensitive. They know when things aren't right between you and Mom. They know when things are not right between you and Dad. When you're not in love, according to God's plan, a child will feel that. And they'll begin to react and respond. Sometimes I struggle because I get a lot of calls from parents wanting to fix their children or wanting their children to experience counseling. This is my personal opinion only. There should never be a place where we send our children for counseling, because it's not the child's problem. The child is reacting because of something in the home created by Mom and Dad. And they're reacting to it. In their sensitivity, maybe they're becoming rebellious, maybe they're becoming angry, maybe they're becoming suicidal, maybe they're becoming depressed, but something isn't right in the home. Just this summer, I had a couple that's bringing a teenager into my office that's 14 years old. And we sat and we talked about things he's doing. He's stealing, he's lying, he's attempting drugs, he's starting to hang out with the wrong crowd at school. And he's an adopted child, just a lot of dysfunction going on. And so I sat and I listened to them for 3 hours, and I shared a few ideas that I might have. And then they asked for a second session, and they thought that maybe I could fix the son. So the son came into my office first. He agreed to come in and sit in my office. So he came in, slouched down in the chair across from me, and I looked at him. And his name wasn't Tom, but I'm going to use Tom. I said, Tom, I'm going to ask you a question. Would you allow me to do that? He said, yeah. I said, do you want to be here today? He said, absolutely not. He said, the last place I want to be on earth right now is your office. I said, I believe that. This makes total sense. I said, I wouldn't want to be here either if I were you. It's not a very pretty place to be. I said, what's it make you feel like to be here today? He said, like I'm the problem. I said, that makes sense. Totally makes sense. I said, you know what, Tom? I said, I'm going to do something really crazy. I'm going to let you go. This was 10 minutes into the session. I said, I'm not going to make you stay here. I don't want to make you do this if you don't want to. I said, I'm going to let you go. He looked at me like I was crazy because he was expecting an hour of interrogation, of showing him how he was wrong. He looked at me and he said, Jeremy, he said, I'm doing a lot of things that Mom and Dad are blaming me for. And he said, they're right. He said, I'm wrong. But he said, I don't want to do these things. And he said, I'd like to talk to somebody about that sometime. But he said, I don't want to do it today. I said, that's fine. I said, I'll be here whenever you're ready. Isn't that amazing? And he walked out the door, and he sat in the little reclining area where people wait outside, and Mom and Dad came in and sat down. And I told him how it went, and I said, I'll never be effective in helping your son if he doesn't want to be here. And I said, I can't go anywhere with somebody that isn't willing to share their story and share their heart. But I said, you know what I'd really love to do, Mom and Dad? I would just love it if you guys would come back for 3 days. I said, you are great parents. I know you are. And I know that you want what's right. Your motives are right. Your intentions are right. You want to help your son. But I said, between the two of you, I said, I think there's some things that we could probably work on. And Mom began to cry. She looked at her husband and she said, yeah. She said, I feel just like our son every time he raises his voice. And she began to share things that were going on in their marriage that they had never shared with me before. And so they're coming back now for 3 days. Will I have to work with the son sometime? Maybe, probably, but maybe not. Right there was the story. There's a reason this son is stealing. We have an angry, angry father that never had a father that he connected with, a father that moved around. Every 6 months he would move to another state, a father that could never submit or give himself into any culture, denomination, or church. He was a loner across the country, moved everywhere from Florida to Maine to Tennessee to Kentucky to New York, moved everywhere, and took his little family with him. He believed that he was the only one left that was right, very narrow-minded, very critical of others. He grew up in that type of home. Very controlling, dominant father that would beat him if he wouldn't obey. Had no idea how to raise a son that was adopted out of a drug-fulfilled environment coming off the streets of town. Used the same tactics that he saw his father give. Used the same tactics to try to get his wife to respect him. And I'm supposed to fix the son? Friends, let's look in the mirror as moms and dads, and let's share our stories. And that man looked at me and he said, I've got a story. He said, my life has been tough. And he looked at me with tear-filled eyes and he said, I have no idea how to be a dad. I said, I know. I'm sorry. I want to help you with that. I'm willing to walk with you on this journey. And I know in my heart that, friends, when we go through that journey, the greatest beneficiary will be that 14-year-old son that got sent home from school last year for the rest of the year for stealing. How many of those teenagers are we sending off We're sending to facilities and sending them away because they're rebellious, they're disobedient, they're wayward children, and we haven't shared our story. Friends, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. That's wrong. Sending our children away, and we're not willing to share our story, is wrong. It is sin. Because that's a misrepresentation of the Father's love. Because that's not what that Father does. Let's share our story so that our children can be fulfilled to the potential that God has called us to fulfill them with. Again, don't let me paint a picture of perfect parents. You'll never get there. But we learn from our mistakes, and we keep growing, and we keep getting better. The only time that we'll be complete and perfect is when we enter heaven, friends. Believe me, we get enough wrong by just our natural selves, let alone influence from our hurts. We've got enough work to do, even if we're not hurting, because we naturally make mistakes. We naturally don't get it all right. That's where forgiveness and grace comes in as our children. So let's do it for our family's sake. And basically, I just gave you the story of a very typical home. There's obviously very non-typical homes where there's extreme dysfunction, and that just magnifies the situation. That's why we've got children on the streets today in our towns that are medicating their hurts with drugs. Statistics today in the world will tell you that the drugs are ecstatically on an increase. You know why? Because there's no marriages. That's why. It's not that just drugs are just more available or easier to get or more convenient or legalized in certain states. That's not why. It's because there's no marriages. It's too many moms and dads that have never shared their story, that have never found that connection. And the children are hungry, they're thirsty, they're hurting, and they're wounded. That's why. Last thing I want to talk about as far as motivating ourselves to share our stories is that Jesus called us, each of us, to be a light. He said we're like to be a light that's on a side of a hill for all the world to see. We're the light of the world. You would never think about putting a light under a bushel basket and hiding it. It's set on the side of a hill for the world to see. And like we shared last night, when we share our stories, we walk through resolution to experience freedom. It allows the light of Jesus to shine through us so that others can experience it and are not drawn to us, but drawn to Jesus. It's not about attracting people to me. It's not about my title, my reputation, or my church, or my denomination. It's not about becoming like me. It's about becoming like Jesus. If we don't share our stories, our light will look similar to that. How appealing is that? If our lights are out, how appealing is that? When our lights are shining, the love of Jesus is flowing through us, we will make an eternal impact on the lives of others, friends. That's one of the greatest reasons that you're here today on this earth, is to make an impact in the lives of others to greater the number in eternity. If you don't believe it, read your Bible. That's what you're here for. God doesn't come down personally and just reach people. He does it through you. He does it through me. But when the pipe is cluttered, the pipe that allows His love to flow down into me and out to you, when that thing is plugged with a little bit of gunk and buildup and junk of immorality, of depression, of anger, of criticism, of self-focus, of control, of fear, of worry, of anxiety, when that drain is plugged, I still receive His love, but I can't give it to you. I can't separate it coming from Him. Can't stop it. But my wrong choices, the pain in my life, the wounds and the hurts, stop that from happening. And so I can't give it to you, and so I'm not making an eternal impact if that love is not flowing from me to you. I'm going to ask you a question, friends, and I want you to really marinate on this thought again. Will the devil dance upon your grave when you die? What would cause the devil to dance on your grave? The devil dances on the graves of those that have not fulfilled God's will in their life. You see, friends, so many of us have become comfortable with making sure that I get into heaven. I'm going to be obedient. I'm going to be submissive. I'm going to be accountable. And I'm going to confess, and I'm going to repent. I'm going to follow God's word. Build a relationship with Him, and that should get me into heaven. I hear many people say, if I just make it in the front door, if I just have a little corner in glory, if I just have this, if I just have that, I'm satisfied. Friends, that should never, ever be our goal. Our goal is to walk through heaven's gates in all glory, be in eternity with Jesus Christ our Savior, and take 1 million people with us. If anything else is our goal other than that, something is wrong. We are cluttered inside because we are to take others with us. The devil dances on the graves of those that go into heaven but take nobody with them. The devil is in conflict with our Father. He is bitter. He is angry. And he will do anything he can to get back at the Father, and the way he does that is win souls. And to the enemy, it's all about numbers. He doesn't care how, when, or what. He just wants numbers. And he is pretty happy when we walk through heaven's gates and we have not made an impact on anybody. And the church today has made developing Christians easy. We just raise them. Statistics show in the world today that most Christians would rather die for the sake of Jesus than tell somebody about Him. They'll gladly give their life for Jesus in our faith. We'd rather die than tell somebody about Him. Isn't that true? Most of us would agree with that. Most of us would say, absolutely, we'd give our lives for Jesus. If we'd be threatened by persecution today that somebody would take our life, we wouldn't deny our faith. We'd say, absolutely, we're followers of Jesus. Do what you need to do. But why do we get so shook up and nervous when it's our turn to tell somebody else about Jesus? Think about it. How many of us have told the greatest story known to mankind this week to somebody that has never heard the story? See, it's easy. We raise our Christians. We raise our children. We build the church by raising our children. And that's all good and well. There's nothing wrong with that. But is that what Jesus asked us to do in Matthew 28? Friends, that's why we share our story. That's why we achieve freedom. That's why we remove all the clutter in our hearts. Because when you do that, you become excited. There's something that happens inside your heart that you can't explain because of the freedom that takes place inside. There's a light that begins to shine, a fire that begins to burn that you can't hide. And you become so excited about the greatest story that was ever told. There's nothing that happened that's greater than the fact that your eternal destiny was completely changed because somebody died for your sins. He took the punishment upon his shoulder, upon his life, experienced every ounce of God's wrath for you. Your eternal destiny was completely changed to a different place. Isn't that pretty exciting? every one of us was headed straight for the gates of hell. Not one is righteous. Not one is without sin. God tolerates no sin, and sin gets punished with hell. Because one individual was willing to accept the punishment for my sin, are we not very excited about that? Is that just a story that we've heard since we were a child? We hear about it every Sunday. We read about it in the Bible. Must be it's not very exciting if we don't tell anybody about it. How many of you tell people about how great the yield of corn is this year? Or what the price is of beef? We get pretty excited about that, don't we? I just saw Arlen today get extremely excited, and I'm going to use Arlen for an example. And Arlen, I'm allowed to use him because Arlen is extremely excited about salvation, extremely excited about Jesus, and you can't keep him quiet about it. Last night he yelled amen, and about 15 of you looked back like he was crazy. But I'm going to share an example with you. Today he got a phone call. I was sitting in the living room, and a new contractor accepted him to haul logs for him. And he was just so excited about that. He started jumping up and down and clapping his hands because there's a lot better equipment to work with, a lot more money, and a lot better hours, and the people are better. He was so excited about this. He began sharing his story with us because he was excited. How many of us do that with a story of salvation and the gospel? How many of us get so excited about what Jesus did for us and the opportunity to spend eternity with him that we tell others about it? Most of us don't. Some of it's because we've got clutter in our hearts. I remember the day when Arlen wasn't excited. I remember the day him and his wife sat in my office and we processed life together. We worked through some very deep pain. And I watched Arlen and Marilyn on their journey today. And I watched them lead worship in our church today. And I watch him be excited about Christ. And I see a fire that burns in his eyes. And there's few people that I know that are so verbal about Jesus because something happened in here. For some of us it's clutter, for some of us it's cultural. We just weren't taught, or we weren't shown, or we were taught the opposite. And then there's two ditches to every road. I know that too, friends. But let's stay balanced, let's be in the middle. And friends, let's share our story, remove the clutter inside, so that we can truly make a difference for Jesus on the day of eternity. Is it worth it for you to share your story if it would lead one soul from hell to heaven? Picture this. You're up here flying in an airplane. You see the gates of hell here and the gates of heaven here. And you see this lonely soul wandering down through life headed straight for the gates of hell. And all of a sudden, something mysterious happens, and that person that was directly headed for hell made a complete U-turn and came back and started heading for the gates of heaven because you shared your story, changed your life, changed your journey, changed your fire, changed your enthusiasm, and something was said, something was done, something was experienced, something was influenced by you because of what happened in your heart. And you'll never know that till you get to eternity. Would it be worth it? Yes, this topic is supposed to be motivating. Is it worth it to share your story for your wife's sake, for your husband's sake, for your children's sake, for the sake of the world, for the sake of one soul headed for hell? Would it be worth sharing your story? If you don't share your story, your spouse will suffer. Your children will suffer. Your church will suffer. Your community will struggle. And that person headed to hell will probably go on to hell if you don't share your story. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's about Jesus. And we're all working for him. Now, after this topic, we're going to take a little break. Then we're going to come back. And then we're going to talk about practical resolution. For you that are hurting, I want to help you understand the very practical steps to take to go through resolving those wounds of the past and understanding the people beside you. For those of you that want to help others, I want to show you how to lead people through resolution. Because again, most of us don't know how. I'm not being critical, I'm just being honest. I didn't know how for many, many, many years. I carried all those hurts and wounds. I didn't know how. Praise God the day I know how. And I can't be quiet about it. I'm excited about it. I want to help you understand how. Become better at where you're at today and making a difference in the lives of others and leading each other to the healer, to the redeemer, to the restorer. Again, it's your choice. There's nobody that has to do this. It's our choice. God gives us all the opportunity, the privilege to make the choice to go here, recognize our hearts, our wounds, our past, our stories, and resolve them through practical resolution, or we don't have to. And we've got consequences on both sides. It's whatever we choose. Unfortunately, I didn't make that choice until I was 32 years old. One of the greatest rewards that I ever had was sitting across the desk from a husband and wife that were 83 years old. Married for 60 years. But I'll never forget what they told me. They told me that day was the first day that they ever felt love one for the other in those 60 years of marriage. Extremely dysfunctional marriage. A marriage in our local community. A marriage that the whole community talked about because it was so dysfunctional. The kids were wayward, mom and dad were fighting and arguing, and there was always trouble in the church, and there were always issues they were working through, and they got kicked out and rejected and excommunicated, and the whole story. And they come into my office the first day and they tell me, you know what, Jeremy, just so you know, we've never loved each other in all those 60 years, not one day. We started dating because somebody suggested it. We got married because there was no other options. We didn't figure we could find anybody else. This was the only thing we thought we'd have in life, so we decided we'd give it a try. We've been stuck ever since and never loved each other a day in our life. And they were so bitter. And they were so angry at each other that they argued and they fought the first 3 days so loud that the secretary in the facility could hear them 3 doors down from my office yelling at each other at 83 years old. Simple little things like Grandma and Grandpa do. You smell bad. Well, why don't you wash your hair? Look at the dandruff on your shoulder. On the way to church, she's always chewing me out because I've got dandruff. Why can't she? And we went through round and around and around and around and around. I sat and I listened to that hour after hour after hour after hour after hour after hour. 83-year-old people fighting about kicking horses, dandruff on the shoulder, and not wearing deodorant. Those types of things. But I watched through the powers of heaven, I watched that relationship come together And 2 people on Friday sat in my office crying their hearts out, totally in love, telling me that today is the first day that we've ever loved one another. And children writing letters to me saying, "What in the world did you do?" I said, "I have no idea. God does. I don't know what I did. But God does." The church members coming to me and saying, "Jeremy, we have never, ever seen anything like this." The husband calls me 2 months later and he says, "Jeremy, you won't believe it." He said, "We've been going to church for 2 months since we left your office. My wife didn't chew me out one time." He said, "I don't know what this is like." He said, "It's weird. I've never experienced this." He said, "She's waiting for me when I come in from the barn in the evening. She's smiling. She's got supper ready. And we sit, we talk." He said, "We went to bed for 60 years, never ever having one single conversation before we slept." He said, "The other night we stayed up till 1 o'clock in the morning talking." He said, "I don't know what to do." They were like little children. It's because they shared their story. They never knew each other. For 60 years, they were married to somebody they didn't know. And they sat in an office, in a space that they felt safe, and they shared their story. Walked through the process of practical healing and forgiveness, repenting and confession, sacrificed for each other, and fell in love. And today that couple is a beautiful, amazing example in our community today. And I love being around them because they're these 2 little short, heavy-set people that are just bubblier than all get out, that used to be grumpy and angry. And now they're just bubbly and laughing. They're one of those people that shake all over when they laugh. You can see when they laugh even long before you hear. They're just wonderful, great people. But they shared their story. And today their children, their married children, are benefiting. The community's benefiting. The church is benefiting. The last I heard, the old lady called me and she said, "Jeremy," she said, "I don't know what to do." She said, "There's other ladies calling me, wonder if I would sit with them and help them process life." She's making a difference in the lives of others. She said, "I didn't ask for this, I didn't plan for this, I didn't even want this," but she said, "People are calling me, ladies are calling me." And she said, "I can't stop it." You see, friends, paths are being redirected because an old couple, 83 years old, shared their story. Let's take a break. I believe there's refreshments back there again, restrooms off to your left. We will be back in 10 minutes, 15 minutes with a song, and we'll have our next topic. Thank you.